I had a colleague just this last week on another commissioner who said, you know, gosh, it seems a lot easier this year. And I said, yeah, it is. Because of the difficult decisions that we made last year, we're able to move through this year and really focus on increasing our competitiveness even more. I really feel sorry for the legislators because they went through all that agony down in Olympia, and because they didn't deal with the issue, they're going to have to go through it all over again. Instead, I think we need to be focusing on streamlining our government, making it more efficient, more supportive of our state's trade economy. And that involves replacing outdated institutions with ones that are going to meet 21st century needs, or at least the needs of a 21st century international trade economy in this state. And one of those outdated institutions in this state is education. And it's the third factor that I think is really going to determine whether or not we're going to continue to be as internationally competitive as we are today. Now, you might wonder why a port commissioner in King County would be talking about education. But I'll tell you, if we're going to grow the ports of Seattle and Tacoma, we need a workforce that is prepared to enter the aviation and maritime trades and professions. And so we have two initiatives. The first is we're supporting Aviation High School, which is like Delta High School here in the Tri-Cities, because we know we need to encourage students to enter aviation engineering careers. That's because in Washington State, we are the 6th largest state in employing students or graduates with science, math, and technology degrees, degrees that we need if we're going to run a major international airport and 2 major international seaports. But while we are 6th in hiring people with science, math, and engineering degrees, we are 46th in graduating students with those degrees. And our problems with public education are deeper than just not producing enough engineers. It's amazing to realize that but 30% of our 9th graders will not graduate from high school. And if you're a 9th grader of color, your odds of graduating are 50-50. So the second initiative we have at the port is called Port Jobs. And it's designed to help lift people who are not going to go on to get engineering degrees or 4-year degrees to enter the apprenticeship programs or training programs so that they can have careers at airports or in aviation or construction or in the maritime trades. And yet, many high school graduates do not have the basic math, science, or computer skills needed to enter an apprenticeship program. In fact, 52% of the students with high school diplomas last year who applied to community college in our state did not have the skills required to be admitted to community college. And 2/3 of those who did get admitted to community college dropped out in their first year. In a state where our Constitution specifically dedicates us to providing basic education, we have failed. We failed the students, we failed the good teachers, and we're creating a competitive threat. And even more than transportation, so much more than transportation, scrapping the outdated elements of our education system, such as the agrarian calendar, and replacing them with innovative approaches that will meet 21st century needs of a growing international economy is going to take courage and political will. Now, there was some education reform passed in this most recent legislative session, and there is talk about having either the 2011 or the 2013 legislative session. But remember 2014, the Panama Canal's opening. It's not like we have forever. But there's talk about having the 2011 or the 2013 legislative session being focused on transportation reform. But when it comes to transforming transportation or education, we cannot merely reform around the edges and congratulate ourselves and move on. Over the last 2 years of really working to transform the Port of Seattle, I've learned that the measure of whether or not we're reforming enough cannot be how much we've done or how much we've reformed. The measure of whether or not we're reforming enough has got to be how much our competitors are changing. The state cannot simply continue to take baby steps and congratulate itself when the rest of the world is leaping forward. If we're to preserve the international competitiveness of our trade economy, an economy in which hundreds of thousands of jobs in Washington State depend, we have got to start competing on the world's terms. Anything less is taking our competitiveness for granted. And once you do that, it can disappear very quickly. Our CEO, Tei Yoshitani, has a great deal of experience working on East Coast ports as well, and he always reminds us that in the 1970s, Baltimore was the busiest port on the East Coast. And within 15 years, because they took their competitiveness for granted, and because they did not adapt technology to their geography, they had lost their leadership position, and they were developing their waterfront for tourism. With 1/3 of our agricultural products being exported, or 1/4 of everything we produce in this state being traded, we cannot allow that to happen here. And it doesn't have to happen here. The ports of Seattle and Tacoma are working together to ensure we continue to have internationally competitive ports in Puget Sound. But my message today is that while that can go on within the port gates, and we are working to ensure that it does, what the state does also shapes our international trade economy's competitiveness. And while the Port of Seattle is emerging from the last 2 years leaner, stronger, and more competitive, I do not see Olympia emerging from its recent budget crisis at all transformed. And that denial, that absence of reform, that abdication of leadership troubles me. Hundreds of thousands of jobs are involved in us being able to ship everything from airplanes to frozen food products. And it depends upon having progressive, pro-free trade policies at the federal level. It depends on us having competitive ports in Puget Sound. And it depends upon a state having transportation, tax, and education systems and policies that support a growing international trade economy and reinforce our global competitiveness. We know what we need to do to remain internationally competitive. But we, as a state, need to decide that we're going to compete. We need to support the reforms and the projects that are going to make us competitive. And ladies and gentlemen, we have got to elect leaders who have the courage and political will to get it done. Thank you. And I guess I can take a few questions if there's any in the audience. Yes, sir.
I have one. How many potatoes do we import from China?
The question was, how many potatoes do we import from China? And I can tell you that would be 0.
How about the ones on our table here? China, so that's good. So it says.
Chris, we have a magnet problem. Any other questions? Yeah, the question is, and tell me about the asparagus import-export situation. The asparagus industry in this area and in the United States in general has just, increasingly deteriorated. If you look at a chart of who produces asparagus in the world, and you don't put China on the chart, you have probably Peru is #1, and the bar chart's probably like this. And then you probably have the United States, and it's down here, and it's shrinking. And then maybe you have Spain. But if you put China on that chart, everything else just flattens out. China is producing a huge quantity of processed asparagus products. And then Peru has really stepped in largely with USAID funds, international aid funds. They have built an asparagus industry for fresh. They can get 2 or 3 crops a year out of their soil in Peru, and they have really dominated the market that used to be right here in the Tri-Cities.
What role does U.S. immigration policy have on our international trade and our competitiveness?
The question is, what role does immigration policy have on trade and our competitiveness? We need to have an immigration policy that deals with the reality of the situation, and we desperately need some sort of immigration reform, but we have got to have control of our borders if we're going to have a secure and legal economy. The port does not get involved in it, although we did have a motion last week to encourage Congress to do something on immigration and enact this session. I actually abstained because I didn't think that the Port Commission's role was to get involved in congressional immigration policy. But it is an issue that we're going to have to confront, not just for our trade economy, but for the entire U.S. economy. And controlling the borders has got to be the first step in doing that so that we have a legal economy.